Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, the Education Coordinator for Marlene's Market and Deli. Today's special guest that we have with us, and it's always a pleasure working with her and the wonderful Garden Hotline, a local resource for all things gardening. We have Laura Matter with us, and she is going to be speaking on the topic of putting the garden to bed. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us.
You're welcome. So happy to be here. Has anybody who's joined us so far actually called the Garden Hotline before? If you have not, just so you know, this is, as Elizabeth said, a free service. We are sponsored by Seattle Public Utilities and the Hazardous Waste Management Program in King County to talk to people about natural gardening methods. And so our goal is to help people problem solve, find plants, do anything in the garden that they want to do in a natural way. Through this talk, I've inserted a couple of questions that I'm going to ask you guys to answer and put info in the chat. Just put it in the chat box and I'll save that. And that's part of our evaluation that we share back to our sponsors as well. But today we're talking about primarily vegetable gardens, although some of these techniques can apply to your regular garden beds. And we will talk at the very end about choosing plants right now to plant in the landscape. I sent Elizabeth some links, which she will share with you, to a whole lot of different resources. Some of our fact sheets, King County fact sheets, one of the naturals guides about choosing the right plants. And all of that is really good information to supplement what we're talking about today, and also to just to look over, to remember details about what we're talking about. So here we go. Oh, my computer, I was discussing this with Elizabeth. It's a little shy today, so. All right. Now it's working with the click instead of the arrows, so whatever. It likes to forward in different ways. So what we're talking about today is more than just fall cleanup. So the last time I was doing a talk for Marlene's Market, we talked about fall groundwork, which is essentially all the things you do in the garden this time of year. This is going to be a little more targeted, looking at building soil and vegetable gardens, but also just in general, this is a great time of year to assess what's going on in your garden. It's a good time to nurture the soil. Fall is, big soil working period. And then thinking about wildlife in the garden and your planting for next spring, and making plans to make sure that you are including enough plants and habitat for birds and other wildlife, and then especially pollinators and beneficial insects. So I like to encourage people to always keep notes. And so assessing the garden is really a good way to, now is a good time to be looking at what worked really well and why. What did you do something? Was it just the way the weather went? What was difficult to manage and why? And some of those things were really beyond our control this year, like the June pouring rain and getting really a delay on getting things out in the garden. And now we're experiencing this really late summer and into October, which is making up for that, but it's all off kilter a little bit. So if you haven't done so, it's great to track weather each year that's happening in the garden, when your plants are blooming, when you see the first bee or aphid or imported cabbage worm butterfly. So when do the pests appear? When do the good guys appear? Because right now, this year, phenology is off a little bit. The timing on when things bloomed was off with when bees came out this past year because of the weather. And so, for instance, my plum tree had very few plums on it this year because of the weather. And the year before it was a bumper crop. It was huge. So it's helpful to track that. I see a lot of things like the imported cabbage worm butterfly, those little white butterflies that float around in the garden and lay eggs on all your collards and broccoli and cabbage and all that stuff. They're present usually starting in April and then they're kind of petering out by now, except that the weather's been so warm. So potentially some of the insects that are bad for our plants can have an extra generation where that isn't the norm. And then you have continued problems. So it's good to keep up on it too, and keep assessing and looking and seeing what's going out. And then make a plan for next spring, you know, based on what worked well, what didn't. When you think maybe you should set something out earlier, if we have bad weather in June, you know, provide some sort of cover so you can get your tomatoes out earlier, or your peppers, that sort of thing. So thinking about what to do next year based on what you saw happen through this year and what's going on right now. And of course we have smoke, and smoke in the air actually does affect plants. It can dim the sunlight. It's October, so you know most of our tomatoes should be winding up anyway, but I still have some sitting out there I'm trying to get red. Normally I would have brought them in by now, and I'm still waiting to see, but the smoke isn't helping that process any. All right, so the first thing we want to do is build healthy soil. So like I said, fall is a great time to be working on soil, and we're going to look at this from the veggie garden aspect, but again, this is applicable to anything in the garden. Of course, this is easier to do in a vegetable garden where you're removing things and you have just bare soil to work with. But think about these concepts as they apply to your perennial bed or your shrub bed or your herb garden, because you can still do this. You're not going to dig as much in a tree and shrub bed, of course, because you don't want to disturb the roots as much, but you can use some of these applications, do things on the surface of the soil instead. And then we're going to talk a bit about cover crops, which help improve soil and are great to put into vegetable gardens where you're not doing winter gardening. And then mulching as well, and how mulch helps protect plants. So soil is the key to health. It reduces the need for healthy soil reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides, because you will have fewer problems. If you have a robust plant, it can stave off the effects of disease and insect attacks. It can reduce irrigation needs because it's holding water better. It will filter out urban pollutants if it's healthy, and it can sequester stormwater. So soil is a really big component when people are putting rain gardens in. How they build that soil, how they create that soil is very specialized, high in compost, in order to hold a lot of water, slow it down, and pull the pollutants out of it so that it doesn't go down into the storm drains or out into. In Seattle, we have combined sewers, and so combined sewers can overflow with pollution from our sewage. So it's really important to think about healthy soil throughout your yard. Where the water coming off your roof is going. Some people are collecting that, you know, to use for vegetable gardens next year. So all of those things are applicable now to be thinking about. And then healthy soil stores carbon from the atmosphere so that we have less changes with our climate over time. So as I said, soil's the key. We're looking at a picture at Picardo Farm Pea Patch where I gardened for many years. This is one of the raised bed areas for handicapped gardeners. This was a bed that I put cereal rye, annual rye into for my gardening friend who gardened this bed. And this is looking at it sort of early spring as it's really starting to grow more. This is one of the types of cover crops that we're going to talk about. So healthy soil needs to drain. It will nourish your plants. It doesn't introduce toxins to the garden. That's your goal, is to keep it clean and healthy. And soil is also habitat. So I want to really remark on that underneath the soil, there's a lot of activity going on. All of the microorganisms, macroorganisms that live in the soil that help to break down nutrients to feed plants are super important to protect. So they are the ones who are actually feeding your plants. We can put chemical fertilizers on this. Certainly it'll go directly to the plants, but it won't help the microorganisms, doesn't feed them, can kill them, is harsh on soil life. So we encourage people to think about using natural fertilizers in the spring when they're using them, but also practice techniques in the fall that actually build that habitat to create a very healthy, robust environment under the soil. And then soil needs to be fed over the years of growing in it. So it can get depleted if you're growing things like onions, which people don't think about. They think about that as a root crop. It's not. It's actually a leafy crop, because even the bulb of the onion is just modified leaves that are surrounding, that bulb that we cut into. That's why they're peel away the way they do in those shapes, because those are actually leaves. And though they're not photosynthesizing, the green tops are, they need a lot of nitrogen. So do things like broccoli and cabbage and collards and kale. Those are big leafy greens that use up all the nitrogen in your soil. So you really need to replenish that over time. So soil health can make or break plant success. When we have people that call us on the hotline and say, we don't know what's going on, why is this plant looking so bad? We start with the soil. We look at the ground level first. Sometimes woody plants, it's about the mulch. Sometimes with vegetables, it's that they haven't fed them enough. The soil doesn't have enough nutrient in it. So we talk about all those things. There actually can be such a thing as too much compost. So organic matter, usually we're shooting for about 4 to 5%. A lot of times people think you have to add compost all the time, every year, and end up with a soil mix that's high in compost, as high as 20-something%. And that can actually tie up nutrients, because it's using the nutrients to help break down in the soil. So the nutrients that are intended to go to the plants are actually not going to your plants. You do want to get to know your soil type. Do you have clay soil? Do you have sandy soil? Is it rocky? A lot of times if you're living in swaths of area in the Northwest that are a little bit higher than some of the surrounding areas, you could have sort of this glacial till soil that can be like cement and rocks that are sort of fused into soil and clay. So there's a lot of variability around the Puget Sound edges. Sometimes we get really sandy soils. Some of the areas, like in Federal Way, we also have soil that's been impacted by the Asarco smelter. And so knowing if you have contaminated soil will help you also decide if you're going to be gardening in the ground or if you're going to build raised beds instead and be able to control the soil mix that's in them. To amend soil, whether it's sandy or clay, generally you dig in or spread compost. So digging it in, is easy if you have a bare soil area, but this is where I was saying some of these techniques can help just in shrub and tree beds. If you want to feed the soil, amend the soil in a shrub and tree bed, you can just spread it on top, and the soil organisms will do the work of bringing it in to the soil and to lower levels. So over time, takes longer, but you're not disturbing the soil ecology either when you do this. And sometimes people use the no-till method in this way by just spreading things on top and letting that all work in naturally. If you think about natural habitats like a forest, this is what's happening. Nobody's going in there and tilling the leaves into the soil. They're breaking down on top of the soil and becoming part of the undersoil. So if you want to test your soil, fall is a good time to do it. Sort of assess where you are, or early spring, either way. Fall can help you if you're looking at bigger, broader areas in your garden. If you want to enrich your vegetable garden beds and know if they look really low in nitrogen, it's not the end of the world if you're not growing anything, but you can do things right now like grow cover crops that will help you add nitrogen to the soil next spring. It's also good if you're growing a lawn. This is a great time to be adding lime right now, this month. We don't want to go too much further into November, past October, because it starts to get too cool. And then there's not a lot of microactivity in the soil to help break this stuff down. So fall is good. And one of the sheets that I sent Elizabeth to share with you is a edible gardening soil resource sheet, which has different ways to test your soil, including King Conservation District. And I know there are some areas where they don't work with certain cities. I don't think Federal Way is one of them, but you can certainly check that. But there are a couple places that in King County that the Conservation District will not test your soil. That's a free soil test. If you're looking for toxin testing, they can add to that. You pay a little bit extra, and then there's other labs on that sheet where you can find out other things about your soil. All right, so here's one of my questions for you guys to put in the chat box. So how much do you know about cover crops? And these are your answers, or A, B, or C. Nothing, some, and a lot. You've used them, you're familiar, you've incorporated them, and some is maybe you tried it once, and nothing is you have never heard of it, or you've never done it, either way. So I'll give you a second for that. And Elizabeth, I'm not looking at the chat box, so if you can tell me if we're ready to go.
Yes, so we have a couple A responses. And then Jan said, I only grow tomatoes and roses, so not familiar. So
Okay.
that would be an A.
All right, we've got 4 people. Did somebody not answer? You want to give us?
Let's see. Yeah, there's one other person, 2 other people. I think they were also A's as well.
Okay, good, because we're going to talk about them now.
Yay.
You're going to learn all about them. All right, so what is cover crop? This is a living annual plant cover planted to protect bare soil and vegetable gardens. And annual plants go to seed in one cycle. So it's like, it may take a year, it may take a month, it may take 5 months, depends on the plant. But basically, these are not plants that are going to live over and over and over year to year. They're things that typically will die with the frost, though not these plants necessarily. These are cold tolerant, so they can grow through all our winters, even if it snows. But they do have a time frame that they will go to seed and then they will die. So they don't grow. They grow from when you plant them in the fall into the spring. If you were to let them go, they might grow as long as June, but typically they're seeding in the late spring and the plants are dying. They're usually planted in the fall, cover crops, but you can do summer cover cropping. That can help protect plots that you're not gardening. Say you don't have time this year, you're really busy, you're traveling a lot, and you just want to grow those couple of things, you know, like your tomato plants, the things that are most important to you. And then your other beds, you don't, you know, you still have them, you don't want to get rid of them. You can put cover crops in them that will sort of fend for themselves. You still need to water them some, but they can bloom through the summer. They provide food for bees and other beneficial insects. These are things like buckwheat and phacelia, really great plants. Phacelia actually has a little bit of fragrance and really the bees adore it. So those are great options. They are annual plants. And for the fall cover crops, there are some other things, but generally cereal grasses like rye and wheat and pea family. So things you would like, you know, see to make flour out of, or the pea family plants that we're familiar with, some of which are weeds in some people's minds, like vetch, and it can become a weed in your garden. So we're going to talk about ways to prevent that as well. So the benefits of cover crop are many. They protect the soil from winter rain and leaching of nutrients. So they're providing cover over bare soil that breaks up the rain. So the raindrops aren't as big. By the time they hit the soil, they've kind of broken up a bit. And then they use up some of that water so that the nutrients that are in the soil, if you have bare soil, the rain hits it, all the water seeps down into the lower zones and takes those nutrients with it, including calcium, which is really important for keeping our soils less acidic. We have naturally acidic soils in the Northwest because of our heavy rains, or our, rains all winter and for many, many months. They also prevent and combat soil compaction. So they prevent compaction by that same method of having those raindrops break up, but also they combat it by actually putting lots of deep roots into the soil. And, they will fill your raised bed up quite thoroughly with roots. And what you're seeing in these pictures here, the top picture is just some varieties of peas that are grown through the winter. And some of these are edible, but they're not super tasty. They're sort of like more like what you would feed livestock pea crops. They tend not to be as tender and juicy as the things we grow to eat ourselves, but they're still edible. You could eat the pea shoots on these if you wanted to. The bottom picture is some cereal grass, looks like a little bit of rye, and then there's a bit of vetch in there, that's sort of feathery leafed plant that you see, and then crimson clover, which is an annual clover, which has this beautiful red flower on it that the bees love. So we're going to see a lot more pictures of these as we go, but you're seeing you can use them as mixes, you can use them as solitary crops, doesn't really matter. They can prevent erosion, and then they open up soil in the root zone by having those deep roots. They add organic matter to the soil as you turn them in, as they die and you've turned them under, and they add nitrogen to the soil in a couple ways, which we're going to look at. One, of course, is when you turn them in. And then they enrich the soil with microorganisms because they create this habitat under the soil, especially as you turn them in, you've created this big feeding frenzy of all this organic matter in the spring. And they can keep weeds at bay, and sometimes things can inhibit certain types of weeds. So like the ryegrass that you see in that bottom picture, the grass can inhibit quackgrass, which is that grass that has that long underground stem. People think of it as a root, but it's technically a stem that runs and runs and runs everywhere and then pops up all over the place. Really invasive grass. And ryegrass can actually inhibit quackgrass. And so Picardo pea patch used to, years ago, it is the original pea patch in Seattle, and it's a big multi-acre site. And half of it was grown as seasonal gardens for many years. When that was happening, they cover cropped it every year, and we used ryegrass, and we were able to keep the quackgrass down in the south field, but it was all over in the farm in different areas. And then once they converted to a year-round garden, that quackgrass rebounded like crazy. So it was really interesting to see that people didn't have trouble with it in the summer when we grew ryegrass, plowed it in, and then they grew their summer gardens, and then we tilled it in the fall and planted seed again. But when it was left to its own devices, that quackgrass took over. And then they can attract beneficial insects. As I mentioned, those crimson clover, beautiful, and flower, the vetch flowers, pea family plants flower, and you want to have those, you want to let them flower a little bit if you can, if you have time. Sometimes you're turning them in before that happens, and that's fine. But if you can, you want to let them flower, then catch them before they go to seed. So you don't want any of these things to seed, because they can then become things that you have to keep pulling all summer long. So
Hey,
they
Laura,
protect, yes.
we had a quick question. Where is a good place to purchase seeds for cover crop?
I can't hear you. I don't know what happened, but I all of a sudden can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect. We had a question. Where is a good place to purchase seeds for cover crops?
Oh, great question. We're going to talk a lot more about seeds. So you'll see, and I did not put that in here, and that's a great question. Hardware stores that sell gardening things like True Value, McClendon's, they all carry cover crop. The local nurseries, garden centers, like, even Fred Meyer would carry it. Home Depot probably has them, Lowe's, places like that. I buy them all over the place. I think my most recent purchase was at McClendon's, and I put cover crop in my tomato pots that I put in my driveway, and I pulled a few of those already that were done producing, and put cover crop in them. The little song sparrows that hang out in my yard, There's a hedge across the driveway from my pots. Apparently were watching me while I did that, because as soon as I left, and I actually had to leave in my car, I was backing my car out, and they all came flying down into the pots, and they've been digging them up. I covered them in compost and they still found them. So you could feed the birds at the same time. So we're going to go through each of these benefits in a little more detail. So the benefits of cover crop: protection from rain, keeps the nutrients from leaching out. So imagine, a garden with, especially one in the ground that has, deep soil profile. The nutrients that the plants would be reaching in that maybe 12-inch depth of their root zone would be below that zone, so they wouldn't be available to them. So it helps to keep them up higher in the soil, and then it prevents that compaction. So you can see, like, this is a person's foot making a big splash, but basically if you extrapolate that and think about a raindrop, hitting the soil, it does the same thing. It's like a little asteroid hitting the soil on a micro level. And so you're trying to protect, and you can see how thick this cover crop is in these raised beds. And that's what you're going for, is this thickness. So it just is a stand of material, plant material that's growing all winter long. It helps to break up compacted soil with this root system, so you can see how deep roots can go and wide. And so if you fill in your bed with that, so in this previous picture, imagine all the roots under the soil. This picture on the right is the rye that was pulled from these beds later in the year when it was tall. We actually cut the grass tops down because there was going to be too much material to dig into the beds. We cut all the tops down, and then we turned on this material under. We broke it up and turned it under. But look at that mass of roots that created. This is a small bed that we were working with in an apartment building down on Queen Anne Hill that has a rooftop garden. And you can even do it in small beds like this. And so this is sort of the process. We're starting to dig it under here.
We had another question.
Okay.
So it was a clarification question that you had planted cover crops in your planter pots, and then also, if you plant a cover crop, do you need to mulch it?
No. So the cover crop is the mulch. Think of it as sort of living mulch. It will grow and cover the soil. So mulch, and we're going to talk about mulch in a little bit. Mulch does the same things that cover crops do, right? It protects the soil, breaks up the rain. It doesn't have the other benefits of adding nitrogen or putting down deep roots or those things. But it does protect the soil. And so this is the other method of doing that. So we'll talk about mulch in a few, and you'll see slight differences, but they all have the same goal in mind, to protect soil over the winter. So in this case, as you're looking at this bed, this is in process. You could leave it like this. I'm a tidier gardener, so I would make sure all that soil was off the edges of this and clean it all up. And for me, I would turn that under a little bit more. But in process, you're trying to get the leaf blades under the soil. But if you leave a few up, it's not the end of the world. Just be aware that they're going to try to grow again if you leave too much green growth above the soil level when you're turning them under. So this is how the organic matter gets added to the soil. All of that breaks down, and you can see some of that is dried. So you're actually mixing a little carbon back into the soil as well. And then it turns, you get this carbon sink that happens because you're putting that material into the soil where it's not just going to be dispersing into the air. So pea family plants are specialized. You're seeing a lot of them on the right coming up. There's some grass in there too, but this is a young cover crop stand, just starting to grow. And on the left, what you're seeing is on the roots of a pea plant are little root nodules that actually have the capacity to work with bacteria, that the rhizobia that lives inside of them and traps nitrogen from the atmosphere that's coming into the plant as the plant is doing respiration. And so the gases come into the plant the nitrogen gets trapped into these nodules and it's converted by that bacteria into a form the plant can use. It's kind of a little miracle. And imagine, you know, all of this going on all those little seedlings that you see in the soil to the right. So when, and it can feed the soil a little bit. Some of that leaks out as it goes. So it can be beneficial to the things growing around it. But at the point where you pull it and kill the plants, all of that gets released into the soil. So not only are the tops feeding all of the nitrogen that's in the leaf blades or the leaf blades of the grass, that's all feeding the soil when you turn it under, but also these nodules add nitrogen through this conversion method. So really good combination to put together. Also, the grasses, as they grow, peas, if you grow in peas, you know, they have little tendrils that grab onto things. You know, you have to put up pea netting for them. The grass can help hold them up and become part of that structure for them. So leaves are a source of nitrogen. You turn them under the soil, and they decay, and that releases the nitrogen. You need to give that a few weeks to fully decompose because you want to make sure that you have, especially if you're planting seeds, you want to have a nice arable soil. You don't want a bunch of clumps in it. And you don't want things that might be trying to regrow as well. So you want to get full decomposition, and weather will make a difference here. So a couple of weeks usually is enough. If we have a really cold spring, it might take a little longer. If we have a really cold spring, you might delay when you dig it under anyway, just because maybe the soil's too wet. We don't want to work soil when it's really wet. It's not healthy for it. It can compact it. And so you have to play that by ear a little bit. And it also matters when you want to plant that bed. But all of this is going to feed the soil microorganisms. And so I borrowed this picture from a company that sells materials to enrich your soil, Fertile Gold. And I love the idea of this. Welcome to Microbia, population 50 billion. So the idea is that, you know, we think about soil, that we walk around on it. It's a whole world under there, and 50 billion in a spoonful. So think about extrapolate that out into your garden bed as to how much life is under the soil that we are protecting and taking care of. So microorganisms are important. As I said, they help to feed your plants. You're basically feeding them in order to feed your plants. You want to build habitat by planting cover crops. They matter above and below ground. Habitat matters. And then providing food. So for instance, like beetles live above ground and they like to live in sort of jungly kind of spaces or mulchy areas, but they can also be part of what's helping to improve soil. They can open up soil because they move around in it. So above and below ground, and then you want to make sure that you are turning this in properly and you're creating food for soil life, which in turn will feed your new plants next spring. So this is an image of seedlings coming up in good nutritious soil, and that's what you're aiming for, is you're trying to build this habitat that will feed the soil life and then feed your plants. So they can decrease weeds too. So look how thick these are. The stand on the left is that same spot I showed you before, which is a mix of grass. It looks like mostly rye and pea and vetch in here. And then on the right, it's primarily vetch. There's some maybe crimson clover in there too. A little bit of rye, it looks like might have had a seed mix that was heavier in pea family plants. So in both cases though, there's not a lot of room for other weeds. And we know in the Northwest that we have, if we were to leave this bare, it'd be full of things like the cresses that like to grow, those little ones that the seeds pop out when you try to pull them. There's a lot of those. There's a lot of little annual weeds that grow in cool weather, both fall and spring. And so nature will provide cover, certainly, but you want to choose the cover that you're putting in here. You're going to get weeds in here if you don't put anything in here. And the cresses, by the way, sometimes that family of plant is used as a cover crop too. It's the cabbage family plants. They're actually related. So those crosses are edible if you want to eat them. They're like, you know, radish seedlings. They have kind of spicy flavor. They, but they can put out, you know, thousands of seeds. And so you then have a weed issue if you're trying to grow other things in there. But they are cool weather crops or plants. So you want to combat them by putting in these cool weather substitutes to protect that. All right, so the benefits of cover crop also attracting good insects. And on the left, you see a little bee visiting some vetch flowers. This is one type of vetch. There's the purple vetch is often what we're growing in cover crop mixes. And then this is just a little video that I'm gonna hopefully try and play. There's no sound to it. It's an image of this lady beetle larva that you see on top here. And this is in late spring, also in those beds I showed you before that we had planted that were so thick with the mix of cover crop. And this is late in the spring when the crimson clover flower is fading and we're about to cut it down. This was the day we came to cut it, and we were also filming what we were doing. But what we discovered was it was just full of lady beetle because aphids had found these flowers. And so it attracted all these lady beetles. And we didn't worry about the aphids because we're about to cut it down and turn it under. We're going to destroy that crop. But we also left a little bit of it standing to protect where we saw the lady beetle larva. So this is just a little image. So it's moving. These are the larvae of lady beetles. They look like little alligators. We get calls about them all the time on the hotline because people think they're pests. They're moving very fast because they're predators and they're finding things to eat. And so that's the goal. You want them there. You want them to do this. Now, that flower is very small. It's about maybe an inch long or so. So these guys are small. You need to keep your eye out for them. They have a little bit of the coloration that the adult is going to have. When they get to the point when they're going to pupate, they attach themselves to a leaf, and then they are still and immobile, and they're very vulnerable at that state. And then they develop into that adult lady beetle, and you will see the change in them over time. You'll see that change happening. So they look kind of like half and half. So keep your eye out for those. Let's see if it'll. Okay. So types of cover crops, cereal grasses, specifically, again, here's that image of, you know, the root system, your root mass on the bottom of what was probably rye, annual rye. And again, these are annual grasses. So ryegrass, barley, oats, and winter wheat. These are things we use to make flour and bread and grains that are used for lots of things. So the grain flours, what you're seeing down here below, you don't want to let it go much past this stage. These can be, you know, grasses that keep coming up in your bed all summer long. So cut it down at right about this stage or before. And if you aren't ready to turn it under, grass like your lawn is grass. You can cut a lawn and it grows back. You could cut this down by half and it'll grow back up again and still continue to protect your soil. So you don't need to pull it out. If you're not ready, you can go ahead and just cut it and use those tops. Well, maybe, you know, just put them back in the bed with the other grass or put them, use them as a mulch somewhere else, as long as they're not fully seeded and can't develop into a new plant. They produce a substantial amount of organic matter to the soil. Like I said, we had to pull out half of the stuff we were cutting in those beds because those beds aren't very deep. Had those been taller beds, we could have used it all, but because they were shallow, we couldn't. And so we used a lot of that as mulch around what we planted. And we used one of the beds to plant things right away and then used it as mulch around them so that it would just decay and decompose on top of the soil. So they can really help break up clay soil, and they help to bind together sandy soils. A lot of these things aggregate soil because there's a lot of sort of sticky residue on some of the bacteria and microbes that are in the soil that actually help to aggregate soil into particles. So there's, you know, soil science is a huge and fascinating subject, but it's not without looking at live things that actually help to make it up. And here's some of the flowers on the pea family. So that's that purple vetch I mentioned. That's a very typical mix in cover crops. Really beautiful. Bees love it. You'll see early bumblebees on it. You see a little bee down here on the crimson clover. Very wonderful for early pollinators, especially the early bumblebees as they come out. You're looking at vetch, fava beans, which people grow as a crop as well, but can be grown as a cover crop. Crimson clover, Austrian field peas, also just the winter peas. They do that atmospheric nitrogen transformation. They leave a lot of material in the soil. There's a lot of leafy matter on here. They also have very strong and deep roots that some of them slightly cap rooted, so they go very deep into the soil, can break up soil. And then, as I said, wonderful for the beneficial insects. So these I'm just going to go through quickly just so you can sort of get a picture of what they look like. So rye, they're all grasses, cereal grasses, oats. Oats tend to have a wider blade. I love growing oats. I love the way they look. They're more robust. And then the wheat as well. And then the legumes. Crimson clover is a little tiny seed and has that little red flower. And, you know, I think that might be, I didn't put this page together. I think that might not be a crimson clover flower. So I'm going to switch that out. You want to be looking at that flower, which is tall and long and red. This is a different kind of pink clover, but essentially it's what you're looking for, the vetch and then the field peas. And these will get little white flowers, just like the peas that you grow yourself, and the seeds look the same essentially. So when do you plant these? So now for cereal grasses, if you're doing a stand that's only cereal grasses, and what I put here is oats. Like I said, they have a little bit wider blade, and this is the oat seed. You can plant them all the way through mid-November. Ryegrass in particular is one of the most cold hardy of all of them. Pea seeds should go in sooner, by the end of October, especially crimson clover. It won't germinate very well if the soil starts to get cooler, and then you'll have kind of a sparse stand, which you don't want to have. So if you want to do a mix, do them now, this month. If you want to just do cereal grasses, you have some time into November to get them in. So this is mixing them in. This is when we cut them down. That's how tall they got. Those beds I showed you in those earlier rainy pictures. This is at the point where we were digging, cutting them and digging them. And we cut the tops down and saved that material. Like I said, used it as mulch. And then we also took it, there's beds above on the hill, up the hill to the left, which we used as, put it as mulch in those beds too, which weren't ready to plant, and which we had just mulched and not cover cropped. So the timing depends on what you'll be planting and when. If you want to plant tomatoes, you can let this go for a while, but again, you don't want those grasses to flower, so you would be cutting the tops and letting it continue to grow for a while. Most of it is ready to turn in by April, and April is usually fine for working soil, but some people can get their gardens going in March, and that's good for things like planting onions and lettuce and spinach and bok choy and all those radishes, all those really early crops. So if you're ready in March and your soil can do it, that's fine. Even if it's not as tall as this, it's fine. It's still going to be enough organic matter. And don't let them go to seed so they regrow. And you can use that extra matter as mulch, as I said. All right, one more question for you, and then I'll have one question at the end. So have you applied mulch in your garden? We ready to move on, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay.
Looks like we have a couple bees, several bees. Oh, we also had another question.
Yeah.
I have many viola plants.
Uh-huh.
Can I turn those under in the spring and can they be a cover crop?
Well, that's a really good question. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm love viola, so I just like I let them grow all summer if I can, and you know how they get leggy because they're not getting the nice shade and cool weather that they like. So yeah, I mean, if you're ready to be done with them, you certainly can. I mean, you can do that. Like we're going to look at this with mulching. You can do that with any crop in your garden. Really, is cut it down and turn it in, and it can become material for the soil. The only things you wouldn't do are things that might be grow too much from vegetative propagation that you don't want to like have pop up everywhere unless you're trying to propagate more of them. Um, and you want to not do that with disease materials if possible. But yes, still could work if you have a lot of them. Absolutely. Looks like we have another person.
Oh, yep, let me submit
All right, mulch. So the definition from the Dictionary of Oxford Languages: materials such as decaying leaves, bark, or compost spread around or over a plant to enrich or insulate the soil. And I want to point out they're talking about decaying materials because that is part of the point of this, is that we are looking at materials that are full of carbon, that will break down over time. They help add nutrients to the soil. They can enrich the soil. But they're also protecting the soil, which we were talking about with cover crops as well. And we're talking about organic matter. A lot of people use things that are not organic matter. So there is such a thing as rubber mulches and all those. Those do nothing to help the soil other than cover it. They may keep weeds down. But a lot of times they make the soil less nutritive underneath. So the benefits of mulch: they can conserve moisture. And so this is a big one, less in the winter as it is in the summer and spring and summer. So mulching can actually keep the soil more moist, keeps it from all the soil evaporating or drying out at the surface, prevents weeds also. This is, one of the biggest reasons people use mulches is to prevent weeds. But another really important thing about mulch is it can moderate soil temperature. So cover crops do this as well. Mulch does this any time of year that it's applied on the soil. It can keep soil warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer, which is good. It moderates it so it doesn't go through high fluctuation of temperature, which is better for the plants. And so I don't mention it as much with cover crop because it's protecting the soil. And yes, it can help moderate soil temperature in the sense that it's not going to freeze as easily, which is good for the soil. But mulch is really protecting the plants that it's growing around, as well as the soil. So soil organisms are protected in this way as well. Also protects soil from compaction in the same way. The rain hits it, it breaks up, it soaks in slowly. You don't want to forget about your potted plants in the same way that I cover cropped my tomato pots. If I didn't do that, I would mulch them with something over the winter. And then light versus dark colored mulches can have different effects in the garden. So if you have a dark colored mulch around your tomatoes, the soil is going to warm up a little bit more than if you have a light colored mulch, which is going to reflect light and keep the soil cooler. So tomatoes might not like that as much, but your broccoli might. So thinking about straw versus compost, a dark leaf mulch, leaf mold mulch that you're putting around things will have different effects on soil temperature as well. And I do want to encourage people to, we're just starting to see leaves turn and fall. So I have a maple tree, it's in my neighbor's backyard, big leaf maple on the hillside that actually is super stressed from not having water. And they removed a bunch of plants from around it this past year. And so the tree has been dropping leaves since July. That's not normal. But they are about to, do big dumps. So a lot of times we have more leaves than we need in our yard. Want to encourage people to share them with the neighbors. If you're on a Facebook page that's a neighborhood page or next door, just encourage people, and you may get help from people to help you rake them up too. So my sister does this in her neighborhood. She rakes up her neighbor's leaves to use in her own garden because she doesn't have quite enough herself. So leaves are full of nutrition. We end up sending them in the clean green bins off to all of the commercial compost sites, and then we turn around and buy compost back from them. And that's great. Compost is wonderful and has its use, and I buy it all the time. But if you already have this product in your garden and you have space for it, use it as a mulch right where it falls. As long as it's not covering up plants underneath it, you have to sometimes uncover things, especially ground covers. But if you have an area where you have spring bulbs planted, leaf mulch is a wonderful mulch to have over the top. They will come up right through that. It also creates habitat for beneficial insects and birds. There's a lot of ground birds that dig through mulches to find insects. So they're busy looking for things all winter long. And then, as I mentioned, beetles, black beetles, brown beetles, which are in lots of sort of mulchy leafy areas, they actually eat slug eggs and young slugs. So they are your allies in the garden, and you want to make sure you have spaces for them to live where they feel protected. Farmers now build rows into row crop areas that they call beetle banks, and they put native grasses in them, fill them with these grassy plants that creates habitat for beetles to live in. So the beetles hang out in there, and then they come down to feed in the fields and then go back into the banks for protection. And so that is actually a useful tool in the organic farmers, toolbox to be able to combat slugs in their fields. So these are all a bunch of different types of mulch. You have the leaves that you see in that top picture. I see somebody raised a hand. We got a question?
Yes. We have a question from Gail. Can you use mulch from Douglas fir leaves?
Mm-hmm.
And what type of compost do you purchase? Because you said it should only be under 5% soil composition.
So your soil should have only about 5% organic matter. And so that includes compost when you're digging it in. Will raise your organic matter. And I buy lots of kinds of compost. In Seattle, we've had free compost giveaways that Tilt, where I work with Tilt Alliance, used to manage over the years. We didn't do them this year. I don't know if we'll get back to them or not, but the city of Seattle gives away free compost. So I got my compost for free, and that comes from Lens Composting, which I think Sky Nursery might sell their product. They don't sell bags that are, with their name on it, but stores, garden centers, nurseries buy it and bag it themselves, or they'll sell it to you in bulk. You can also get it in bulk from them directly. You're up in Stanwood. I use Cedar Grove. A lot of people worry about Cedar Grove because it's, collected from our municipal waste stream. But, they test all the time. I want to be clear that compost companies have a lot of testing that they have to stand up to. And then Cedar Grove actually certifies their product as organic. So they're doing extra testing. One thing that's hard for any of them to get away from is plastics, which us as consumers are contaminating the waste stream with, and they can't get all of that out of there all the time. So that's, not their fault. They do their best to get what they can out of there, but just to be aware that sometimes that commercially made compost can have that. You can also find worm compost, which wouldn't have plastic in it because it's not coming from commercial sources or, municipal sources. It's just coming from worm composting, and all they're putting in there is food scraps. So lots of different choices. You can buy composted chicken manure, steer manure, all of those things as well. And composted manures have a lot of nitrogen in them, whereas other composts have some, but not as much. So there are variations in in the types of compost materials you can buy for sure. You can get them just about anywhere. I mean, they're available all over the place. So wood chips are one of those really nutritious, useful mulches that are found in lots of places to buy, but you can also get these mixes like what you see below, which could be, you know, when you get a load of wood chips, it could be anything depending on what an arborist is working on. So sometimes you can go directly to an arborist. If you see somebody in your neighborhood chipping, working on tree trimming, you can just stop and ask them if anybody has claimed the chips. Be prepared that they're going to dump a 10-yard load. Again, here's where Nextdoor and those Facebook pages come in handy. I've gotten free wood chips from my neighbors twice in the last 2 years, 2 different neighbors that weren't even on my block. They were near enough for me to drive to and go get chips. And that's all I needed at the time. So I didn't need a 5-yard load, but they didn't need it either. And so they were sharing it out with the neighborhood. And I got some really fabulous chips both times from those pickups. And I just would shovel them into bags and put them in my car. And then I brought them home and I sat them in my driveway and then used them where I needed them, spread them out. But wood chips are nutritious because you have live parts of the tree, you have living leaves that have been chipped into it. All of this is decaying, it's adding habitat and food for all the microorganisms, mycelium that breaks down from the wood products, just builds this wonderful network of soil health underneath the soil. Bark, on the other hand, you know, people use bark a lot. Great for pathways where you don't need to worry about how you're building nutrition. But bark by nature is a protector of trees and shrubs, woody plants. They have bark on purpose. It keeps water from getting in. So they're hydrophobic. They don't let water through very easily. And they don't have a lot of nutrition. They're kind of a little bit more sterile than the wood chips themselves. When you get a load of wood chips, you are getting some bark mixed into this as well, which is fine, but it's a mix. So if you do use bark in your beds where you want nutrition, like around your trees and shrubs, you might think about mixing some compost in or putting it underneath or something like that so that you get a little bit of nutrition added to the mix. And mixing it a little bit can help. Composted bark is better. So if you have some that's already on the composted, you know, starting to compost, and you can tell the difference. It's usually darker, richer. It will be better to use. You can get commercial mixes that are manure and wood products like, you know, Sawdust Supply is no longer in business, but they used to sell this wonderful steer co-product that was steer manure and sawdust mixed. There are other mixes like that. Some of them are wood shavings, some of them are sawdust, some of them is chicken manure, some's steer manure, and all of those help. The manures help add nitrogen back to that mix, and they look more like soil. So a lot of people aesthetically like that look better than chips. In vegetable beds, you can use burlap over the soil, and a lot of times, you know, we cut up things and put them underneath. So you can cut plants down and then put burlap over it. And essentially that's the same thing as the, you know, digging your violas into the bed. You could actually just pull them up and turn them over and then lay some burlap over them and they'll decay underneath. You don't even have to dig them in. Sheet mulching is used with like cardboard or newspaper where you want to suppress a lot of grass or a bad weed problem, but it will build soil to all the carbon in the cardboard or newspaper as well as the material that you put on top, which is usually wood chips to try and smother that, breaks down over time and helps feed the soil. And then cover crops, which we also talked about already. So soil building and protection, these act as mulch during the winter. When you use compost, this is wonderful for vegetable gardens and annual beds. You don't want to use too heavily of woody products, wood nutritious for the soil, but also ties up nitrogen right in the zone of soil that it's touching. So small rooted, short rooted plants can get a lack of nitrogen if you put too much wood around them, but it can build soil over time, which is fine. So I usually suggest using like leaves or compost in veggie garden annual bed areas. So how to apply it? You can put 1 to 3 inches in a shrub and tree bed, keeping that away from the base of woody plants. You can kill a woody plant by burying it in mulch or soil. Trees and shrubs have a root flare, which should be visible. If you cover that up, you put too much moisture up against the base and trunk of the tree, it can actually cause compression. The part of the plant that's alive where nutrients are moving is very thin and under the base of the bark. So keep it away from the base of plants, just sort of feather it away. You can add compost underneath, as I mentioned, to help add nutrition to that. About 1 to 2 inches in veggie beds. You can do it deeper if you have a completely empty bed. So like this bed we're seeing in the picture, you could cut up a bunch of materials, break up all your leaves, throw them all underneath that and build a really deep mulch layer, and then put burlap over it to keep it all in place. And then you anchor that with maybe bricks or rocks so the mulch or so the burlap doesn't just fly away in the winter wind. That'll let moisture through, it lets air through, and everything underneath will decompose. By the time you pull it away next spring, there shouldn't be much left that you just sort of turn under. Compost doesn't suppress weeds as well, so keep that in mind, but it's great for veggie gardens that are actively growing and that you're tending to, where you can pull the weeds. It's very useful for pathways, always. And as I said, bark can repel that water and has minimal nutritive value. Wood chips can also supply those mycelium networks. So there's a lot of fungal colonies that start to build under the soil. And the soils in the Northwest are high in fungal colonies as opposed to bacterial colonies, which you see more sort of in Midwest soils. So when? Now? Now's good. Uh-oh. I'm hearing an echo. Are you guys hearing that?
No, I'm not sure why you would be hearing that. But we do have a question
Okay.
on the Facebook Live. What cover crop would you recommend for heavy soil with buttercup and bindweed?
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I wouldn't do a cover crop. I would actually try to pull as much of that as you can first. And soils are dry. It hasn't rained. So you need to loosen, probably water the soil, water it, even though that seems weird to water these weeds that you want to get rid of. Water it, loosen it up, take a garden fork, loosen the soil, go sort of start at one edge, loosen it, pull that, loosen it again, and just keep moving. So you don't want to mix it up. You don't want to like get in there in the middle of it. You want to start at the edges and work through it. Get as much out as you can. And I would sheet mulch it like we talked about back here, this sheet mulch. So with sheet mulching, you're going to lay down cardboard, newspaper, but I would get as much of that out of there as you can first, because if this was just a bunch of annual weeds, I wouldn't worry about it. I would just go directly over them and not do that work. But these are pernicious weeds that have underground stems. So buttercup and morning glory both have those underground stems we think of as roots. They're actually rhizomes. So they are an underground stem with roots coming off of them. Any little piece of that will regenerate and create another plant. The buttercup actually is a stolon that's above the ground like a strawberry. So they both have these stems that run, and you're trying to get rid of as much of that as you can. All of that will repopulate. Sheet mulch it, dig it up, sheet mulch it, and then next spring you should have less of a problem with it. The other thing to know about buttercup is that it actually loves acid soils, it loves moisture. So if you can open up that soil, once you've gotten it out of there, then would be the time to plant a cover crop to try to open that soil up and break it up so it drains better and you won't have as big a buttercup problem. But you can also apply lime. So you could have put lime down after you dig it up under the sheet mulch this fall, and that will help to change conditions for that buttercup to grow. Really does not like soils that are more alkaline. So you can change the pH of the soil. Unfortunately, those are some tough ones to work on. I have mostly buttercup in my yard as a pest. I don't have much bindweed, fortunately, just in a couple of places. So when do you apply these mulches? You do it now. So sheet mulching now, you want to get in there, water those areas you need to pull the weeds from, or put this mulch down directly over it if you're sheet mulching, or, weed your bed out and put some fresh mulch down. For the winter, will protect and nourish the plants. In the spring, early spring is a good time to mulch to get ahead of these fast growing annual weeds, like this little picture you see on the left. This is one of those cresses. So there's a lot of these. There's a lot of different species of these. And then there's a lot of other kinds of annual weeds that take advantage of our cool soils when the soil is bare, and the seed bank is there already in the soil. And so they're ready to go. So getting that mulch down quickly, and then in early summer to protect soil from drought. You always want to avoid working on the ground when it's frozen, because that can damage the soil. And then another thing, which I didn't put here, but I should have, is if you are weeding an area where you have a bunch of these weeds, say you have a whole bunch of cardamine, which is these little cresses that's growing. Shotweed is one of the names for one of those species. You just pulled a bunch of it out, and now you have all this fresh bare soil. It looks really good. Well, there's probably a seed bank in that soil, and when you're pulling weeds, you're moving the soil, and the sunlight that's coming in is hitting those areas that have not been exposed to light. So you're actually getting light into parts of the soil that haven't seen it in a while. And these kinds of seeds actually are triggered by far red light, which comes from the sun, to germinate. And so you have just given them the signal, hey, there's sunlight, start growing. So mulch then. As soon as you pull those weeds, have some mulch ready to throw it down, because then you can inhibit those things that are going to try and germinate under the soil. So, sort of knowing, all of this is about knowing how plants grow, how the plants you're trying to keep away grow, how to encourage, beneficial insects versus plant eating pests. It's about knowing their life cycles, about understanding how they work and how to protect and prevent them. So planting, we're going to plant some plants now, because planting in the fall is a great thing to do. Soil is warm enough for roots to grow. Plants will establish better. And certainly it is right now. We're having a normal fall that we're like in, 70 degrees in October. It is getting cooler at night. So plants that you have out there, if you haven't already harvested your basil, some people might have already lost it because of cold nights, and it's going to decline. But there are plenty of plants that are cold hardy and great to grow now, things that are permanent plants, trees and shrubs, things like that. The rain, when it comes, will help keep them hydrated. So if you're planting now, you do need to water, and I would water before you plant and then after you plant, and then keep your eye on it. But there's lots of things, but you can see, how deep root systems go. And if you imagine planting now and you have a plant that's starting to go dormant, and it could be a deciduous shrub, but it also could be an evergreen shrub. So it's slowing down its growth. It's not trying to grow and bloom and put fruit out. It's trying to sort of go to sleep. It's going to grow a root system that's more robust. So by the time that the spring comes, it will have a bigger root system on it. And this is how deep some root systems can go, even more than that. The root is a huge part of the plant that we hardly ever see. So here's some plant choices: spring bulbs, spring flowering bulbs. The obvious, these beautiful little early crocus. These are species crocus we're looking at in this picture, but there's the bigger, fancier crocus. I love the species ones because they come in all these really kind of effervescent colors. They're very pale, and they catch the light really beautifully. They're very sweet. Crocus, daffodil, tulip, hyacinth, allium, snowdrops. Those are some of the more classic, but there's tons and tons of different spring flowering bulbs that you could plant. You do want to be aware that some critters like them, like squirrels, and I'm sure maybe all of us have stories about squirrels stealing our bulbs. They will pull up daffodil bulbs. They won't eat them. They will pull up tulip bulbs and they will totally eat those. They will eat your crocus as well. So sometimes you have to do things to protect them, like if you have them in a pot, you can take some hardware cloth. And so you put the soil in the pot, put the bulbs in, and then put some hardware cloth over it with big enough. And hardware cloth is just a type of wire mesh that you can cut pieces out of. It's used a lot in fencing or gates, fencing for livestock and things like that. But you can use pieces of that with wide enough squares. It's kind of square holes in it that the growing tips can come through, and they will. And then you can they can't dig them up. The squirrel will dig in there and hit the wire and go away. You can also use red pepper flakes or cayenne pepper, but you have to reapply that. But I've used that with good success, just sprinkling the top of my pots if I have bulbs in them that they'll want. They will try to dig your daffodils up, so do it for anything. And then they will go away because they don't like that. They do need a cold period to bloom, which is why we plant them now. And now is a good time to plant, now through part of November. So kind of like the last of the cover crops, getting them in by November 15th. They need time to develop roots to feed the flowers for next spring. So we do want the soil to be a little bit warm. So in the same, you're using the same principles you want them to establish. And they are super fun. Lots of shrubs and trees. Think about edibles. So here's a blueberry plant. This great time of year to plant blueberries. I have 3 of them in big pots in my backyard, and they do really well. And now is a great time. But even things that are evergreen, so like broadleaf evergreens like rhododendrons or myrtles, conifers, even dwarf or large ones if you have room for a big tree. Now is a great time for them to establish. Think about a lot of the deciduous plants that fly, especially ones that flower in the spring, but other ones that provide lots of food sources and shelter, like maples and oaks. These are not exhaustive lists by any means. I did give you links to some plant lists to think about lots of things. So other fruiting plants like apples and plums and cherries, there are lots of dwarf versions of those. There's columnar versions of apples. There is a dwarf cherry tree now, which we put one in a couple of years ago in our children's garden at Wallingford at the Good Shepherd Center. It's growing. Woody herbs, great time of year. They're hardy. They're hardy throughout the year. Rosemary and lavender. Be aware rosemary can get quite large. It's a shrub. It's a big woody shrub. I have 2 on my parking strip that I use a lot for programming that we do, where we use them to make oils, infused oils, or we dry them, or we use them in wreaths and swags in the wintertime. And so rosemary is a really great evergreen plant, but it can get quite large. And lavender, of course, most of us love lavender. Lavender is a wonderful bee attractor. You will see many species of flying insects on that in the summer. Native trees, shrubs, and ground covers, super important to have these in your garden. Wildlife, native wildlife recognizes native plants. And so you want to be able to have things that will feed them and shelter them. There's a lot of, there's Anna's hummingbirds in the area that actually benefit from having flowering plants growing in the spring. They do come to my rosemary, which I noticed I'm starting to see a few blooms on them already. They bloomed last year from about November all the way through May. And the hummingbirds were all over them all winter long because it was one of the few things that was blooming. So they like those, but they also love things like Oregon grape that blooms early in the spring, late winter, things like red flowering currant. All of those are native plants. I want to really encourage you to take a look at deciduous native shrubs. There's a lot of really beautiful ones that people don't think about, like that red flowering currant, mock orange, the ocean spray, nine barks. Those guys are beautiful shrubs, and they look great in a landscape setting and are really good for wildlife. Lots of ground covers, and of course, evergreen huckleberry is a favorite, has been used in Northwest landscaping for many, many years and actually gives you fruit. I have one in my entry that had some fruit on it a little earlier, which was great. So this time of year, they can develop all those really deep roots before they're trying to push out new growth, and they're going to be more successful, happier in your yard. Vegetable garden, there's fewer things to actually plant right now if you're not doing cover cropping or mulching. If you want some things to put in to become a winter garden, garlic is probably top of the list, but being aware that garlic's going to be in your garden beds until June at least, because it takes that long to mature. But if you have a place that you don't want to put anything in until June, maybe you just want to plant a few tomatoes following that, then you can do some garlic. Now, garlic is one of those onion family plants. It's going to use up a lot of nitrogen, so you will need to enrich the soil after you've pulled the garlic. Maybe get some chicken manure and dig that in, and then plant your plants into that. Green onions and shallots also are winter hardy. I just planted a bunch of green onion where I took my basil out. I have one of those plastic towers, that sit on top of each other, each of the layers, and have these little sort of side pockets to plant into. They're strawberry pots, kind of idea. And I filled that full of green onion for the winter. Cabbages, collards, kale, and other brassicas. It's getting a little late to seed them. You could try it, and they would be pretty small, but that gives you a head start on next spring, and you can mulch around them. But if you can find starts of these right now, it's a great time of year to plant them. They develop a great root system. They like the cool weather, completely tolerant of all of this snow and all of the other. And then snow peas. So a lot of people think only about planting peas in the spring. You could have planted peas a month or so ago and gotten a fall crop, and you can plant them right now. I planted them through October and I've had mine. I actually did some in the end of September that are coming up now from seed I saved from some of my peas I grew last spring. And they're coming up. They're cold tolerant. They'll sit there, and then they'll grow faster and sooner in the spring. So you don't need to worry about it. It's a great method for me because I get really busy in the spring with my job, and I love to grow peas, but then I never get to them. It's like, oh, I'll do it this weekend. Oh, I'll do it this weekend. And then I don't get to it. So if I do it in the fall, when I have a little bit more time, I usually get a crop out of them, and I know it's done. And then fava beans, people use these as cover crops, but you can also use them as an edible crop. This is a great time of year to plant those. So all of these are useful things to plant. All of them you can plant from seed or bulb, with the exception of the brassicas, which I would recommend doing starts of right now. But if you can try starting some in your house, it's a little faster. If you have a greenhouse or a grow light, you might be able to get some starts big enough to set out for the winter. So plant care in the fall. When you are planting trees, shrubs, bulbs in beds, in your veggie garden, enrich the entire bed with compost before planting if it needs it. The reason you want to do the entire bed is you don't want to put in, say you're going to put in a red flowering currant and you're digging a hole for it and you put a bunch of compost in there and then you plant the plant. That soil profile is different than the soil around it. You want it to become accustomed to the native soil. And so if you need to enrich a bed, you should do the whole thing so that the roots won't just grow in that circle, because what can happen is they can just grow around and around and around in that hole that you planted and become girdling roots, which can over time actually impede the growth of the plant, sometimes kill it. So we do encourage people to think about the entire area. I showed you the picture of the roots. Think about how far roots go. There's more underneath the soil than you know, so encourage that. You do want to mulch after planting. You want to water it and then mulch it so that it will stay moist underneath. And if the weather stays dry like it has been, keep inspecting the plant. So they're talking about some rain. We'll see what happens. The last time it rained, it barely rained, and nothing got that wet. It was still really dry. And when soil gets drier, it becomes more hydrophobic and it takes a few waterings to get that to stay in the soil. So it's probably a good idea to be watering your garden now before the rain comes in order to make sure it can take the rain in properly. The harvest for things that you plant, like in a veggie garden, will be next year's crops to early to mid-spring, except for that garlic, which is summer, usually an early summer harvest. And then, you know, just that'll be there growing for you, and you will have food earlier in the year next year. All right, so this is my last question for you, and then you can ask me more questions. But what is one thing you learned today that you will try in your garden? Something you haven't necessarily done before.
I know I will definitely utilize the knowledge about the cover crops.
Nice.
Anyone else, folks? Don't be shy. I'm going to check the Facebook Live. Sheet mulch.
All right.
Yeah. And Karen said, thank you. Stream. Oh, and then Patty said, I can use cover crops in my raised garden beds. Yeah, and I never thought about using them in container gardening. I would just flip the dirt and, you know, everything out of it, and then just basically have it empty. But if I can, you know, utilize this knowledge of the cover crops, then I can have things in there and replenishing the soil, so I'm not having to constantly turn it back over time and time again.
I use it there in the same way that you would a raised bed, because these are big pots. Tomatoes, you know, generally we're recommending that people rotate crops like tomatoes. And it's one way to help mitigate that, where you're changing the soil profile. I won't do it if I get blight on my tomatoes. I would start over with fresh soil, but I don't have any blight conditions this year, so I'm not worried about it. And so I'm watching for that. But it, you know, they're really heavy. They're full of soil. I don't want to dump them. It's a lot of work. So it's easier to put cover crops in and then just dig that in the spring.
So smart. I love it.
Any other things that people will try?
Oh, she also said, yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to move to my very last slide, which is just to show you who we are, who we're sponsored by. So the hotline, as I said, is a free service. That's our email, phone number, website. We are managed by Tilth Alliance. We are based out of the Good Shepherd Center offices in Wallingford. We also have offices down at the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands in the Rainier Beach area near Beersheba Park, right next to it. And that is a co-managed site with Tilth and Friends of Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands. And it's owned by Parks Department. And actually the gardens we grow on at the Good Shepherd Center are also owned by Parks Department. But the building itself is Historic Seattle. So we're in really neat spots, both places. You can come visit us there, walk through the gardens. There's a lot of signage telling you what's going on there. At the Rainier Beach site, there's a U-Pick farm. So if anybody wants to make the trek over there, there's U-Pick areas. You just weigh and log what you take so we can track it. There's a lot of really great crops. My team grew some long beans and Asian cucumbers there for a program we work on outside the hotline about culturally relevant plant starts, and we shared the U-Pick. But there's all kinds of great things there. There's going to be a winter market at the farm too in December, I believe. So if you look at the Tilth website, you'll see that. But the hotline is sponsored, and the reason we're free is that these folks sponsor us, pay for us to be here and be staff and be out talking to the public. Cascade Water Alliance as well, but also the Rainwise program, which is a Seattle-based program, but King County and SPU both monitor that or manage that. And that's a incentive program for people that live in Seattle and different basins to build rain gardens and put cisterns in to prevent overflows of sewage into the surrounding waterways. There are other programs in the area that 12,000 Rain Gardens keeps track of, other incentives for stormwater programming, if you're interested in that as well. But yeah, I mean, we do all this work at the behest of our sponsors here who really, you know, are invested in making sure that we're all living in a clean and healthy environment. And we get the benefit of being able to come out and talk to people and share what we know and learn what you know, because we're always, it's always a two-way street. A lot of people know things that they share with us as well.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's always a pleasure. And I always am like learning something new. And then I get to tell all my friends and my father that's into gardening. I'm like, oh, did you know? And my dad was like, no. And I'm like, well, check out this presentation. I'll send him the
Oh,
video link.
that's fun. Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate folks coming and joining us. You know, the interest that people show. I think people really want to know, you know, how to garden and protect our resources and, you know, be responsible and protect wildlife. And this is what we do.
We are super appreciative. We're super appreciative of everyone on the call today. Thank you so much. And just for those of you that are watching the repeat, I'm going to put in the comment section on the live stream. We have Laura's presentation from last month with us on our YouTube channel. I'm going to post that right now to the live stream. And then also, she's putting on a fantastic class on December 10th. And it is about the importance of evergreen plants and also making wreaths, swags, and crowns. And so this way you get a little bit of knowledge about the lovely evergreens that we're so blessed to have around here in the Pacific Northwest, and then also how to utilize those and make a lovely gift. And it's a free class, so I'm going to put that information in the live stream. It's in the Zoom chat here for those of you that are here with us in the Zoom. I'm going to go ahead and take this and post it to the live stream.
And I think Elizabeth, did Gail already leave us? Yeah.
Yeah.
I did answer her question, but it went quickly because I went right into the other questions. So I just want to be clear that yes, any conifer or duck fir or anything is fine to use as wood chip.
No, I think she had messaged me directly. I was like, thank you. So
okay, great.
Yes. Well, thank you, everyone. Stay in touch. If you have any suggestions for 2023 classes that you would like to see, stay tuned for the comments link and survey. And we appreciate you so much. Take good care.